Welcome to Case Studies with the BizDoc, and this week I'm taking another request from people who wanted to know about Alibaba, the giant e-commerce company in China run by entrepreneur Jack Ma. And you know what I think is really interesting about Alibaba is that he's a self-made guy. Didn't come out of Harvard, not a Harvard dropout. He's a guy like you and me who went out there to solve a problem as an entrepreneur and struck gold. And we're going to dive into it, and this week I'm calling this The Rise of Jack Ma and Alibaba. We may come back in the future and do another case study about some of the many companies that they've invested in along the way, but today let's take that ride that Alibaba took starting in 1999. Along the way, today there will be two core points. And the first one is anyone can be an entrepreneur, just solve a problem. Solve it well. The second point is when competition comes, be fearless. Be fearless. And I'll tell you why. On that second point, because a minute ago, you didn't have a business. Now you have a business. And if a minute from now, you don't have a business anymore, but you have experience and a reputation for boldness and going out there and trying to start something, you've got more than you started with. I believe in that second principle from my heart. And anybody that knows me knows this. They will hear the following statement many, many times. And it's, I'd rather climb to the top of Mount Everest and fall to my death 1 foot from the summit than be sitting on a park bench when I'm 80 years old, looking up at a mountain and wondering why I never even tried to climb. And that's what I feel about point number 2. Be fearless. What have you got to lose? Now let's take a look at the fearless guy named Jack Ma. So Jack Ma starts Alibaba in 1999. Let's step back just a few years to 1995. Here he is, a school teacher coming to the United States for the very first time. He had a translation company that he had in China, and he was doing some work with that, taking advantage of some emerging trade and acceleration in the economy that had been happening. And he come to the US, and his friends showed him the internet. He hadn't seen it before, believe it or not. And so he searches for beer. And to his surprise, he didn't turn up any Chinese options. And he said, this is weird because China does have some good beer. I mean, beer is hundreds and hundreds of years old, and China's got some great beer out there. Why isn't there any beer here? And more importantly, why isn't there much of anything from China? And he returned home and he said, you know what? I'm going to take a shot. And so he forms a thing called China Pages, kind of like Yellow Pages for China. And this is 1995, as I mentioned. And so he gets off and running with that, and he wants to make it a place where the world can find out about products that are in China. Well, it failed. Like most businesses that strike out, he didn't make it. And as a matter of fact, there was a little bit of a story that was out that maybe he was forced into doing a deal with China Telecom or something, and he lost control of the company. But whatever happened, China Pages didn't make it. So here's a guy who, again, not a Harvard dropout. As a matter of fact, he took the entrance exam for the China University not once, not twice, but 3 times. He failed it the first 2 times, and he studied to be a teacher. And that's what he did originally. He was a teacher making $12 a month. That's $12 US per month being a teacher in China. And you can go search on YouTube, right here on YouTube, and find some of those images of Jack in this oversized, really baggy shirt, just excited and being a teacher in front of these wonderful, cute kids. And you can see the passion that he had for teaching and the passion that he had for life. But nonetheless, that's where he started, as a teacher. So here he is now, a free agent after China Pages, can't even talk today, sorry about that. After China Pages folds up, and he is in the midst of the internet revolution that's heating up in 1999. And he said to himself, you know what, I'm gonna take another swing. And this time, he brings together a group of his friends, 17 people, and that's what the 17 is here for. 17 people in a little apartment in China to form Alibaba and get off and running. They wanted to basically make an e-commerce solution, only they didn't call it that. They were just out to use the internet to conduct commerce and get something going. It was interesting, he said he got the name Alibaba sitting in a coffee shop in Malaysia. And as the story goes, and who knows if this is folklore, this what gets repeated, but as the story goes, Jack Ma had asked some people, what do you think of the name Alibaba? And a few people said, oh, I've heard of Alibaba, I know the story. Open sesame, the magic. And he thought, wow, open sesame, open up a market. And he claims that that's where he got the name Alibaba, from that simple encounter. I've been thinking about it and then talking to some people in a coffee shop in Malaysia. So he gets off and running with his 17 friends in 1999. And guess what? They struck gold. Within 1 year, based on their success, they raised $5 million from Goldman Sachs, the bank, the massive international bank, $5 million. And then he raised shortly thereafter $20 million from SoftBank in China. And SoftBank is a Chinese telecom company with a very, very active and progressive technology investment group. Damn it, Tom, SoftBank's in Japan. It's been there for a long time. So here he's raised $25 million a year after getting Alibaba off the ground, and they were off and running. And it was interesting because right around this time in 2001, they're 2 years old when the tech bubble burst. And that was a tough time in the United States technology and the venture capital market. As a matter of fact, at that time, I was a venture capitalist of sorts. I was managing a corporate venture capital effort called eCompanies Wireless, and it was a joint venture that Sprint had invested in. And I was the managing partner from the Sprint side. And 2001, I could tell you, it was a tough time to be starting a company, especially if you're just getting off the ground. But they kept working on it, and with that money that they had raised, believe it or not, in 2001, Alibaba was profitable. Really incredible stuff. Now, to make an e-commerce solution in China is a little bit different than making it other places of the world. I'll give you an example. In China, not very many people had credit cards, nor did they have access to them. So Alibaba created Alipay, which was kind of like kind of like PayPal for China. And they built this system so that people could buy and sell things on the internet. Because in China, trust in a retail transaction was very important. And people did not trust sending their money and waiting for something to be shipped to them. So they liked the fact that thanks to Alipay, that the money didn't leave them until they actually received what they ordered. So it brought trust and it enabled people to conduct e-commerce. So there's a cultural element as well as the fact that this infrastructure just didn't exist. They had to build it. Well, there you have it. First great innovation. So Alipay was a success for the Chinese market. But along comes a threat. eBay acquires EachNet in 2003, and EachNet had 80% of China's small consumer commerce market, so small transactions, small purchases. And this was a threat because this is what they were out to do. As a side note, Rajiv Dutta was on Jamdat's board, the company I was with at the time, and he was the CFO of eBay, and they were very aggressive and they were looking very strongly to China. And he was a really smart guy. Unfortunately, cancer got him way too early in 2011, and so everyone that knew him misses him. But he was really sharp, and they were thinking broadly on a global market. But they ran into a buzzsaw in Jack Ma, because Jack Ma was really focused and armed with investment and success. He wasn't going to back down. So they launched Taobao, which was basically the eBay of China. And he said, listen, this is my market and we're going to own this. And Taobao, it's going to be free for 3 years. So he's promising that if you sold your, whatever it is you were selling on Taobao, for 3 years, there'd be no fees paid to him. 3 years. And that was a strong guerrilla move. He also had some of his Alibaba employees pummeling the message boards and the internet bulletin boards. Remember bulletin boards back in the day? He had them pummeling them with positive message about, hey, if you're in China, you should be on Taobao, not eBay. You should be on Taobao. And absolutely drove the awareness. It was a real guerrilla marketing technique. And if you've read things like Sun Tzu, The Art of War, that's a great book to read if you're an entrepreneur, by the way. Many people talk about that, but there's another book in there too. It's called Guerrilla Marketing by J. Conrad Levinson, also a legendary book in guerrilla marketing. And that bulletin board trick by Jack Ma was a guerrilla trick, and it worked. You had eBay, coming up and boldly saying they weren't backing down, and the CEO Meg Whitman in 2004 with Taobao moving up is saying, nah, China's going to be our biggest market in 10 to 15 years, biggest market ever. Well, shortly thereafter, 2005, Alibaba announces that Yahoo China had basically given up, and Alibaba was going to operate Yahoo China, and Yahoo was investing $1 billion for 40% of Alibaba. Huge. So now he's really armed. He's got the Yahoo China. He's armed with this extra capital, $1 billion of it. The relationship with Yahoo was a little rocky. Yahoo's looking for short-term, results, and Jack Ma was focusing on the long-term, own the market. And so I think that's the right thing for him to do, focus on a long-term play, because Yahoo in those days was also scrambling. They were coming to a point where they were really trying to figure out what they were going to be. And I think Jack Ma really saw that and saw the opportunity. So there is a happy ending to this for Yahoo. A few years later, Alibaba bought back half of the shares in Alibaba that Yahoo owned. They bought them back for $7.1 billion. So Yahoo bought something for $1 billion, got $7.1 billion back, and they still owned half of what they had bought in the first place. That was huge. If it wasn't for that kind of success that they had with Alibaba, Yahoo would have died a long time ago. And as I mentioned previously, Yahoo was sold in the equivalent of a garage sale here in 2017 to Verizon Wireless for, $4.8 billion or something. But that was it. Back at the story. So we have this big Yahoo arrangement that happens in 2005, and in 2006, eBay gives up. eBay basically turned over its operation to a small local partner, and Alibaba had won. They had dominated in China, and they had literally chased eBay out of China with Alipay and Taobao, and the rest is history in terms of the way they kept growing. It was interesting. It bears in mind talking about the culture of Alibaba and how they grew. They had this legendary, lightheartedness about it, which was unusual because most people that worked for businesses in China, they were very stoic and very rigid. And Jack Ma tried to make it a lot of fun. As a matter of fact, they used to have this annual talent show where the executives would dress up and do things that were humorous. And Jack Ma himself used to put on makeup and wigs and sing pop songs, which people thought was really amazing because, most leaders in that culture were very dignified and very proper. And here's Jack Ma just cutting loose with his employees. As a matter of fact, this led to something that was called the AliFest, where they would actually do this talent show in a stadium because there's so many employees had joined the company, they needed to do it that way. And you know what? That reminds me of a guy like Richard Branson. Richard Branson is fearless and unafraid to do things for his brand and for his people. And if you go out and Google, there's some very funny pictures of where Richard Branson dressed up in a wig, lipstick, and a flight attendant's uniform and promoted his airline and promoted the fact that he was not too proud to serve drinks dressed as a flight attendant. And there's Jack Ma doing the same thing, just showing you a very human, fun side of him. And so you see a lot about his leadership. I mean, how can you not, if you lived in China, how could you not want to join a company like that to have a much different experience? It's almost like a capitalist experience or a rigid experience where they celebrated the individual succeeding and driving forward above it all. So away they went. Along the way, you're probably thinking, wow, if they're so successful, did they go on the stock market at some point? Well, yeah, they did. From 2007 to 2011, they were actually on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. And Jack Ma wanted to do some structural things in 2011, wanted to issue a couple different classes of stock that would enable him to name people to the board and have a little bit more control as a leader. But the Hong Kong Stock Exchange said, no, we don't do that here. And so he said, really? Well, then I'll delist. And he delisted from the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. You know, it's interesting to point out, he's not the only leader that thought about that. Zuckerberg over at Facebook, he has different classes of stock, and he controls the voting and controls the board and the future of Facebook. So in the US stock market, you're free to do that in a capitalist system. Do what you wish. And so delisting in 2011 from Hong Kong, Jack Ma started plans to go public on the greatest stock exchange in the world, the United States. And away he went. And when he ran that IPO out, that IPO at $25 billion in 2014, actually it started out as $21.8 billion, but it was so oversubscribed and overheated as people came in, it swelled to a $25 billion IPO, making it the largest IPO in history. $25 billion IPO, the biggest in history. There's only one word for that. Bam! You go from being a guy who 3 times had to try to get into college in China, and a teacher, loving life with enthusiasm, all the way to being the CEO 14 years later of the biggest IPO in history. And I think that when you look at the ramp of what they did as they became the PayPal and the eBay in China, it's amazing. I'll share some final stats with you, which I think you'll probably find absolutely stunning. I find them stunning. Today, Alipay accounts for half of the online payments in China. Wow, that's very impressive. And it accounts for, Taobao accounts for 75% of the online transactions, sales in China. And China has an event over there, it's called Singles Day. It's like a big day for shopping, kind of like maybe Black Friday in the United States. And they set a record for Singles Day in 2015, the one-day sales, one day, $14.32 billion in online sales in one day. That's just amazing. And that just shows you just the power and the momentum that Alibaba generated. So thank you for making the suggestion. I very much enjoyed taking you through the growth and the origin of Alibaba, Taobao, and Alipay, and the dynamic leader that came with it, Jack Ma. I promise you we'll come back and do another case study diving into the intricacies with what did they do with all that money and what did they do from there. But right now we celebrate an entrepreneur and we look back on those 2 points. Anyone can be an entrepreneur. Just solve a basic problem. Here's a guy who failed in a business trying to solve a problem. Why can't I search and find Chinese beer on the internet? Failed with that company but came right back and built a behemoth. And the second point, when competition comes, be fearless. eBay was Lord God King of online auctions, and they took them out and chased them out of China. What a wonderful story. What a fantastic role model for all of us. Not a Harvard dropout, not a Harvard grad, but a guy like you and me that went out to solve a problem and went from zero to history. Well, we need the pillow. The pillow. Thank you, Paul. Well, thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to Valuetainment, the best channel on the internet for content for entrepreneurs. And until next time, I'm Tom Ellsworth, and I hope I left you better than I